Amy Carter walked through the lower decks of the starship Meridian Dawn, carrying her toolbox and checking the power systems. She wore a simple blue uniform that marked her as an engineer. The ship was huge, with corridors that seemed to go on forever, and rooms filled with technology from different alien worlds. The Meridian Dawn was not just any ship. It was the flagship of the Galactic Defense Fleet, and it carried representatives from 12 different alien species. All of them were working together to fight against something terrible called the Void Swarm. These mechanical enemies moved from star system to star system, destroying everything in their path like a plague made of metal and circuits. Amy had been on the ship for 6 months now. Every day she worked on maintaining the quantum processors and making sure the power flowed properly to all parts of the massive vessel. The other crew members knew her as a quiet woman who did her job well but never caused any trouble. In the engine room, she often worked alongside Tony Rodriguez, another human engineer who had become her friend. Tony was always talking and making jokes while Amy preferred to listen and observe. The alien crew members seemed to like both of them well enough. There was Vexa High, a Zephyrian with bright purple feathers and sharp golden eyes who worked in tactical operations. The Zephyrians were proud warriors who believed their technology was the best in the galaxy. Vex High often spoke about the great battles his people had won and how their weapons could destroy any enemy. Then there was Chardon, a crystalline navigator whose body looked like it was made of living glass. The crystallines could see time, differently than other species, which made them excellent at plotting courses through space. Chardon rarely spoke, but when she did, her voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Amy watched and listened to all of them. She learned about their cultures, their ways of thinking, and their approaches to warfare. She never spoke much during the daily briefings that General Marcus Blake held for all senior staff. Amy always stood quietly in the back with other junior personnel taking notes on her datapad. General Blake was the commanding officer of the Terran Space Forces aboard the ship. He was a good man and a capable leader, but Amy could see that he was struggling. The alien commanders often questioned human military ideas or dismissed Earth's contributions to the war effort. During these moments, Amy would watch General Blake's jaw tighten, but he always remained professional and polite. Sometimes Amy heard conversations that made her hands clench into fists. Just yesterday, she had been working on a power relay near the officers' mess when 2 alien commanders walked by, talking loudly. "The humans are barely capable of space travel," one of them had said. "Why the Coalition even included them is beyond my understanding. Their weapons are primitive, their ships are slow, and their tactics are outdated." The other alien had laughed. Perhaps they serve as a good example of what not to do in battle. Amy had continued working on the relay, her movements careful and precise even though anger burned in her chest. Tony had been working nearby and had heard the conversation too. He looked at Amy with concern, noticing how her knuckles had turned, white as she gripped her tools. But Amy just finished her work and moved on to the next task without saying a word. This was not the first time she had heard such comments. Over the past 6 months, Amy had collected dozens of similar conversations. She had listened to alien officers laugh about human primitive understanding of warfare. She had watched as human tactical suggestions were dismissed without consideration. She had observed as General Blake tried again and again to contribute to the war effort, only to be treated like a junior partner who was barely worth including in important decisions. Through it all, Amy remained silent. She continued her work as an engineer, maintaining the ship's systems and earning the respect of her fellow crew members through her competence and reliability. But she was always watching, always listening, always learning. The ship's artificial intelligence announced that long-range sensors had detected something troubling. Amy was in the main engine room when the alert came through the communication system. All around her, crew members stopped what they were doing and listened carefully. "Attention. All personnel," the voice said. "Long-range sensors have detected Void Swarm advanced scouts at the edge of the system. All senior staff report to the war room immediately. Junior staff maintain current positions and prepare for possible combat operations." Amy felt her heart rate increase, but she kept her expression calm. This was what they had all been preparing for. The Void Swarm had finally found them. Tony looked worried as he set down his tools. "Do you think we're ready for this?" he asked Amy. Amy looked around the engine room, where human and alien engineers worked side by side to keep the massive ship running. "We'll find out soon enough," she replied quietly. Within minutes, the ship was buzzing with activity. Amy could hear the sound of boots in the corridors as senior officers hurried to the war room. She continued her work, but part of her mind was focused on what was happening several decks above her. General Blake would be presenting the human tactical assessment to the coalition commanders. The alien leaders would debate their options, each species pushing for their own preferred strategies. And in the end, they would probably decide on a plan that ignored most of human military doctrine, just as they had done in every previous simulation and planning session. Amy finished checking the power distribution panel and made a note on her datapad. Then she looked up at the ceiling, as if she could see through the metal and into the war room where the fate of the entire system was being decided. She had been patient for 6 months, watching and learning. She had endured dismissive comments and watched General Blake struggle to make humanity's voice heard in the coalition. She had maintained her cover as a simple engineer while gathering information about every aspect of the coalition's capabilities and weaknesses. But Amy knew that the time for patience was almost over. The Void Swarm was coming, and the coalition was about to make decisions that could determine whether they would survive or be destroyed. Soon, very soon, it would be time for her to step forward and reveal who she really was. For now, though, she continued her work and waited for the right moment. The war room was the largest chamber on the Meridian Dawn. It was shaped like a circle, with a massive holographic display in the center that could show star maps, battle formations, and tactical data from across the galaxy. When all the senior officers gathered here, representatives from 12 different species filled the room with a mixture of colors, shapes, and sounds that would have been overwhelming to most humans. General Blake stood near the central display, his uniform crisp, and his posture straight. He had been preparing for this moment for months, developing tactical plans that he hoped would give the coalition the best chance of defeating the Void Swarm. Around him, the alien commanders took their positions according to their species, protocols, and hierarchies. Commander Krixtal of the Zephyrian Empire was the most imposing figure in the room. His purple and gold feathers were perfectly groomed, and his sharp golden eyes missed nothing. The Zephyrians believed they were the finest warriors in the galaxy, and Krixtal carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never lost a battle. He stood with his arms crossed, looking down at the holographic display with an expression that suggested he already knew the best course of action. High Mystic Lumara of the Ethereal Collective was almost the opposite of the proud Zephyrian commander. Her body seemed to be made of shifting light and energy, constantly changing colors like an aurora. The Ethereals were an ancient species with powerful psychic abilities, and they approached warfare as a form of art that required patience and careful planning. Lumara floated slightly above the ground, her voice like whispers when she spoke. War. Chief Brondar of the Kronos Republic was built like a mountain. His species had evolved on a high-gravity world, making them incredibly strong and durable. The Kronos military favored heavy weapons and direct confrontation, believing that the best way to win any battle was to hit the enemy harder than they could hit back. Brondar's massive hands were scarred from years of combat, and his deep voice could be heard clearly even when he whispered. Amy Carter stood near the back wall with the other junior personnel. She wore her standard engineer's uniform with no visible rank insignia, looking like just another technician who was there to observe and learn. Her datapad was ready to take notes, and her expression was calm and attentive. General Blake activated the central holographic display, showing the current positions of both the Coalition fleet and the approaching Void Swarm scouts. The mechanical enemies appeared as red dots moving steadily toward the inner system, their formation perfect and unchanging. Based on our analysis of previous Void Swarm encounters, General Blake began, I recommend we use the asteroid belt as cover for hit-and-run tactics. We can divide our forces into small, fast-moving groups that strike at their supply lines and retreat before they can respond effectively. This approach has proven successful in human conflicts against superior numbers. Commander Krixtal's feathers ruffled with what might have been amusement. General Blake, with respect to your species' efforts, the Zephyrian Empire has never retreated from battle. Our technology is superior to these mechanical invaders. A direct frontal assault will demonstrate the power of the coalition and destroy them quickly. The Zephyrian approach lacks wisdom, High Mystic Lumara said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. The Void Swarm must be approached with patience and careful planning. We should use our psychic abilities to disrupt their communication networks while remaining safely out of range of their weapons. Psionic warfare requires subtlety, not the crude direct attacks that younger species prefer. War Chief Brondar stepped forward, his heavy boots making the deck plates vibrate. Both of your approaches are flawed. The Kronos Republic has learned that the best defense is an overwhelming offense. We should position our heaviest ships around the gas giant and force them to come to us. When they attack our defensive formations, we will crush them with superior firepower. General Blake tried to maintain his diplomatic tone. Each of your strategies has merit, but the Void Swarm adapts to conventional tactics. Human military history shows that asymmetric warfare and unpredictable strategies are more effective against adaptive enemies. The alien commanders looked at each other with expressions that ranged from polite skepticism to open dismissal. Amy watched from her position near the wall, her face showing no emotion, even as she observed the dynamics playing out in front of her. Human military history, Crixtal said with a tone that made it clear what he thought of the subject. No offense intended, General Blake, but your species has been in space for less than 2 centuries. The Zephyrian Empire has been fighting wars among the stars for over 1,000 years. Perhaps it would be better to leave strategy to those with more experience. Several other alien commanders made sounds that might have been agreement. Amy noticed that Tony Rodriguez, who was standing a few meters away from her, had tensed up and was staring at the floor with clenched fists. General, Blake's jaw tightened slightly, but he maintained his professional demeanor. I understand your concerns, Commander Crixtal. However, the Void Swarm represents a threat unlike any that any of our species has faced before. Their ability to adapt and learn from each encounter means that traditional strategies may not be effective. Traditional strategies work because they have been tested in real combat, Brondar rumbled. The Kronos Republic did not become the dominant military power in this sector by experimenting with untested theories. We use overwhelming force because overwhelming force wins battles. High Mystic Lumara's form shimmered with what might have been disagreement. The War Chief speaks from limited understanding. True victory comes from understanding your enemy's weaknesses and exploiting them with precision. The Ethereal Collective has achieved countless victories through careful planning and superior knowledge. The debate continued for another hour, with each species presenting their preferred approach to the coming battle. Amy listened to every word, watching how the alien commanders interacted with each other and with General Blake. She could see the patterns of pride, cultural bias, and tactical thinking that shaped each species' approach to warfare. Throughout the discussion, the alien commanders continued to dismiss human tactical doctrine as primitive or untested. They spoke about General Blake as if he were a student who needed to learn from his betters, rather than a military leader with valuable insights to offer. Amy observed how General Blake tried repeatedly to contribute meaningful ideas to the discussion, only to have them brushed aside or ignored. She watched as the coalition that was supposed to be working together instead divided itself along species lines, with each group convinced that their way was the only correct approach. The holographic display showed the Void Swarm scouts getting closer to the inner system. Time was running out and the coalition still had not agreed on a unified strategy. The alien commanders were so focused on promoting their own tactical doctrines that they were failing to see the bigger picture. Amy continued to stand quietly near the back wall, looking like just another junior officer taking notes. But inside her mind, she was analyzing everything she had observed over the past 6 months. She understood each species' strengths and weaknesses, their cultural blind spots, and their tactical preferences. More importantly, she knew things about the Void Swarm that these alien commanders had never learned. The moment was approaching when she would need to step forward and take control of the situation. But timing was everything. She needed to wait until the right moment, when her intervention would have the maximum impact and the greatest chance of success. For now, she remained patient and continued to observe. The debate in the war room was getting more heated with each passing minute. Commander Krixtal's feathers were standing up in agitation as he argued with War Chief Brondar about the best way to position their forces. High Mystic Lumara floated above them, her ethereal form shifting colors in what appeared to be frustration. General Blake stood near the holographic display, trying to maintain order while the alien commanders ignored his suggestions. Amy Carter watched from her position near the back wall. She had been observing for 6 months, learning about each species and their approaches to warfare. She had listened to countless dismissive comments about human capabilities and watched as valuable tactical insights were brushed aside because of prejudice and pride. The holographic display showed the Void Swarm Scouts moving steadily closer to the inner system. Soon the main fleet would arrive, and if the coalition was still arguing about basic strategy, they would all be destroyed. Amy knew that the time for patience had passed. She stepped forward from her position near the wall. Her movement was smooth and controlled, with the precise bearing of someone accustomed to command. The room was so focused on the heated debate that most beings didn't notice her at first. Amy positioned herself where she could address the entire assembly. She stood with perfect military posture, her hands at her sides, and her expression calm, but serious. When she spoke, her voice was clear and carried easily across the large chamber. "General Blake," she said, "I request permission to speak." The war room fell completely silent. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Alien commanders turned to look at the human engineer who had just interrupted their important discussion. There was something in Amy's tone and bearing that made everyone pay attention, even though most of them couldn't identify exactly what had changed. General Blake turned toward Amy, and in that moment, everything shifted. The commanding officer of the Terran Space Forces, a man who had led battles across 3 sectors and earned the respect of warriors throughout human space, straightened to attention and responded with crisp military precision. "Permission granted, Admiral." The word hit the room like a physical blow. "Admiral." Several alien commanders made sounds of confusion and surprise. Krixtal's golden eyes widened and his feathers flattened against his body. War Chief Brondar's massive form went completely still. High Mystic Lumara's shifting colors stopped moving, leaving her form a solid blue that indicated shock. Amy stepped forward into the center of the room, and suddenly the quiet engineer they had all ignored for months was transformed. She carried herself with the unmistakable authority of someone who was accustomed to having her orders followed without question. Her posture radiated command presence that seemed to fill the entire chamber. "For the past 6 months," Amy said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "I have observed this coalition's tactical preparations. I have watched each of your species default to strategies that served you well against organic opponents but will fail catastrophically against the Void Swarm." The alien commander stared at her in stunned silence. Tony Rodriguez, standing with the other junior personnel, looked like he had just seen someone walk through a solid wall. The idea that the quiet engineer he had worked alongside for months was actually an admiral was almost impossible to process. High Mystic Lumara was the first to recover her voice. Her ethereal form flickered through several colors before settling on a deep purple that indicated confusion and concern. "This is impossible. Our intelligence networks indicated that no human held rank above General Blake in this sector." "Your intelligence was correct," Amy replied calmly. "I am Admiral Amy Carter, Special Operations Command Terra Prime. My mission was observation and assessment of coalition readiness." She reached into her pocket and produced a small crystal device that immediately began glowing with a soft blue light. The crystal was a command authenticator, a piece of technology that could not be faked or duplicated. As soon as she activated it, every command terminal in the war room began displaying her credentials and authority codes. Commander Krixtal's feathers were now completely flat against his body, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. "You deceived us. You spied on us while pretending to be a mere engineer. This is a violation of coalition protocols and basic trust between allies." Amy looked at the Zephyrian commander with an expression that was calm, but unmistakably firm. I am an engineer, Commander Krickstahl. I hold advanced degrees in quantum mechanics, power systems design, and structural engineering. Engineering is fundamentally about problem solving under constraints. Command is simply engineering applied to warfare. She moved to the central holographic display and began entering commands with the quick, efficient movements of someone who was completely familiar with the system. The display changed, overlaying new tactical information on the existing star charts. What appeared on the holographic display made every alien commander lean forward with sudden interest. Amy had compiled detailed analysis of void swarm behavioral patterns from 17 previous encounters across human space. The data showed something that none of the coalition strategists had realized. The mechanical invaders weren't just mindless destroyers following simple programming. The void swarm learns, Amy explained, highlighting specific patterns in the data. Their artificial intelligence adapts to enemy tactics with each engagement. They analyze every strategy used against them and develop countermeasures. Your conventional approaches will not only fail, they will teach the swarm how to counter every future strategy your species might use. War Chief Brondar stared at the display with growing understanding. His species valued direct confrontation, but the data clearly showed that direct attacks were exactly what the Void Swarm expected and was best prepared to counter. Humanity has been fighting them for 3 years, Amy continued. We have learned that victory requires unpredictability, tactical flexibility, and strategies so unorthodox that mechanical intelligence cannot adapt quickly enough to counter them. She highlighted different sections of the display, showing how human forces had achieved victories by using tactics that seemed illogical or even counterproductive at first glance. Hit-and-run attacks that appeared to accomplish nothing but actually disrupted swarm communication networks. Retreats that looked like defeats but led enemy forces into carefully prepared traps. Seemingly random movements that created patterns the mechanical intelligence couldn't predict or counter. Your species are all superior to humanity in specific areas, Amy said, looking around the room at each commander in turn. Zephyrian technology is more advanced. Ethereal psychic abilities are beyond our understanding. Chronos engineering is more powerful than anything we can build, but you are all thinking like your enemies think, logically, predictably, according to established patterns. The alien commanders were beginning to understand what they were seeing. The quiet engineer they had dismissed for months had actually been conducting the most comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation in Coalition history. She knew more about their capabilities, their cultural blind spots, and their tactical limitations than they knew about themselves. General Blake watched with visible pride as his superior officer demonstrated exactly why humanity had earned its place in the Coalition. It wasn't because humans had the best technology or the strongest military forces. It was because they could adapt, improvise, and find unexpected solutions to impossible problems. Amy deactivated the holographic display and looked around the war room at the assembled commanders. The Void Swarm will be here in less than 18 hours. We can continue debating traditional strategies that will result in our complete destruction, or we can work together to implement a plan that actually has a chance of success. The room remained silent for several long moments as the alien commanders processed what they had just learned. Finally, Commander Krickstahl spoke, his voice much quieter and more respectful than it had been before. Admiral Carter, what do you propose? Amy Carter moved to the central holographic display with the confidence of someone who had been planning this moment for months. The alien commanders watched her every movement, still processing the revelation that the quiet engineer they had ignored was actually the highest-ranking human officer in the sector. The plan I am about to present requires complete cooperation between all Coalition species, Amy began, her voice carrying the authority of command. It will utilize each of your strengths while compensating for the tactical blindness that has prevented you from seeing effective solutions. She activated the display, showing a 3-dimensional map of the entire star system. The Void Swarm's projected path appeared as a red line moving steadily toward the inner planets where millions of beings lived and worked. Commander Krickstahl, your people's quantum processing technology is the most advanced in the Coalition. War Chief Brondar, your magnetic field generators are more powerful than anything the rest of us can build. High Mystic Loom Ara, your psychic abilities can affect electronic systems in ways that mechanical intelligence cannot predict or counter. As Amy spoke, she highlighted different areas of the star system where each species' capabilities would be most effective. The alien commanders began to see how their individual strengths could work together, instead of competing against each other. The key to defeating the Void Swarm is not to meet them in direct combat, Amy explained. Instead, we will appear to retreat while secretly preparing a trap that uses their own intelligence against them. The holographic display zoomed in on the asteroid belt that circled the system's outer edge. Amy showed how human-designed adaptive mines could be deployed throughout the belt, but not in any pattern that would be immediately obvious to scanning systems. These mines will be enhanced with ethereal psionic resonators, Amy said, nodding toward High Mystic Lumara. Your people's psychic abilities can create interference patterns that will confuse the swarm sensors and make the mines effectively invisible until the moment they activate. Lumara's ethereal form shifted to a thoughtful green color. Such an application of our abilities is unconventional, but it could work. The mechanical mines would not expect psychic camouflage. The mines themselves will use Zephyrian quantum processors, Amy continued, but programmed with human tactical algorithms. Instead of exploding when enemies approach, they will create a maze of energy barriers that channel the swarm fleet into specific corridors. Commander Krickstahl studied the display carefully. His golden eyes tracked the projected paths that the minefield would create. This is not destruction, it is manipulation. You want to control where they go, not simply damage them. Exactly, Amy confirmed. The Void Swarm expects us to try to destroy them. They have countermeasures for every conventional weapon system, but they do not expect us to treat space itself as a weapon. She zoomed the display out to show the system's star, a massive yellow giant that dominated the inner system. Near the star, she highlighted positions where heavy cruisers could be stationed. War Chief Brondar, your people's magnetic field generators, will be positioned here, here, and here, Amy said, pointing to specific coordinates. When the swarm fleet is channeled into the kill zone by the minefield, you will use your generators to create a cascade effect in the star's magnetic field. Brondar leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the display. A solar flare cascade. We have theorized about such a technique but never attempted it in actual combat. The power requirements would be enormous, which is why the operation will require precise timing and coordination, Amy said. The electromagnetic pulse from the cascade will disrupt Void Swarm coordination protocols at the exact moment they realize they have been led into a trap. She highlighted another section of the display, showing the positions where crystalline navigators would be stationed. Chardon, your people's ability to perceive multiple timelines simultaneously will be crucial for calculating the exact timing of each phase of the operation. Chardon's crystalline form chimed softly as she spoke. The probability matrices would be incredibly complex. We would need to track 17 different variables across multiple timeline convergences. That's exactly what we need, Amy replied. The Void Swarm's artificial intelligence is powerful, but it thinks in linear patterns. Your people's temporal perception abilities will allow us to coordinate actions across multiple probability streams in ways that mechanical intelligence cannot predict or counter. As Amy explained each component of the plan, the alien commanders began to understand that they were seeing something unprecedented. This wasn't just military strategy, it was warfare as a scientific discipline, with each species' biological and technological advantages integrated into a unified system that was greater than the sum of its parts. General Blake watched with obvious admiration as his superior officer demonstrated tactical thinking on a level that none of them had imagined possible. The plan wasn't just clever, it was elegant in its complexity, using the enemy's own strengths against them while maximizing the coalition's advantages. The final phase requires the most dangerous task, Amy said, her tone becoming more serious. When the Void Swarm realizes they have been trapped and begins adapting to our tactics, we will need to prevent their escape and force them to remain in the kill zone until the solar cascade can take effect. She highlighted the position of the Meridian Dawn at the center of the defensive formation. This ship will serve as the focal point for the operation. We will drop our shields and redirect all power to boost the solar cascade beyond normal safe parameters. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. War Chief Brondar was the first to speak, his deep voice rumbling with concern. Admiral, that will expose the flagship to direct attack from the swarm's heaviest weapons. The survival chances for everyone aboard would be minimal. Amy looked around the room at each of the assembled commanders. The mission requires it. Sometimes the greatest victories demand the greatest sacrifices. Commander Krikstal's feathers had returned to their normal position, and his voice carried a new tone of respect. This level of tactical integration, how long have humans been developing these concepts? Since we first looked up at the stars and realized we weren't alone, Amy replied. Humanity has always known that we would eventually face enemies more powerful than ourselves. We have been preparing for asymmetric warfare on a galactic scale for generations, not just the 3 years since the Void Swarm reached our space. High Mystic Limara's form shifted through several colors before settling on a deep blue that indicated understanding and acceptance. You have been planning this operation since before you arrived on this ship. Every maintenance task I performed was actually reconnaissance, Amy confirmed. Every conversation I overheard was intelligence gathering. Every system I worked on was preparation for this moment. I needed to understand not just our capabilities but our limitations and the cultural factors that prevented us from working together effectively. She looked directly at each alien commander as she continued. You are all excellent warriors and brilliant tacticians within your own frameworks, but you have been thinking like separate species instead of as a unified force. The Void Swarm's greatest weakness is that they expect us to fight like we always have, predictably according to established patterns. War Chief Brondar studied the tactical display with growing appreciation for the complexity of the plan. The solar cascade technique you describe, it has never been attempted on this scale. The margin for error would be extremely small. Which is why we need the best of each species working together, Amy said. Alone, none of us has the capability to defeat the Void Swarm. Together, using tactics they cannot predict or adapt to quickly enough, we have a chance. The alien commanders looked at each other, then back at the holographic display showing Amy's integrated battle plan. For the first time since the coalition had been formed, they were seeing a strategy that truly utilized all of their strengths while minimizing their weaknesses. Commander Krikstal was the first to speak. Admiral Carter, the Zephyrian Empire, places its forces under your command. One by one, the other commanders followed suit, formally acknowledging Amy's authority and committing their forces to the desperate plan that might be their only hope for survival. 24 hours later, the Meridian Dawn's command center hummed with quiet efficiency. Amy Carter stood at the central command station, wearing her proper admiral's uniform, a simple but elegant design that somehow commanded more respect than the elaborate ceremonial clothing worn by many alien officers. The transformation from quiet engineer to fleet commander was complete, and every being on the bridge treated her with the deference due to her rank and the respect earned through her competence. The main display showed the Void Swarm's main fleet, entering the outer edge of the star system. Hundreds of mechanical ships moved in perfect formation, their dark hulls reflecting no light as they advanced toward the inner planets. Each ship was a masterpiece of destructive engineering, armed with weapons that could crack planets and shielded by technology that had defeated every conventional military force they had encountered. Amy watched the display with calm attention, her hands resting lightly on the command console. Around her, officers from 12 different species worked together with a coordination that would have been impossible just days earlier. The revelation of her true identity and the comprehensive battle plan she had presented had transformed the fractured coalition into a unified fighting force. Admiral, called Lieutenant Karen Walsh from the communication station. All units report ready for Operation Lazarus. The minefield is deployed and camouflaged. Kronos heavy cruisers are in position near the star. Ethereal frigates are maintaining psionic interference patterns throughout the asteroid belt. Acknowledged, Amy replied, her voice carrying clearly across the bridge. Signal all ships to begin the withdrawal sequence. Make it look convincing. We want the swarm to believe we're retreating in panic. The coalition fleet began pulling back from the outer system in what appeared to be a disorganized retreat. Ships scattered in different directions, some seeming to flee toward the inner planets while others headed for the system's edge. To outside observers, it looked like the coalition forces had been caught off guard and were abandoning their defensive positions. But Amy knew better. Every ship movement had been carefully calculated to draw the void swarm deeper into the system, while positioning coalition forces for the crucial moments to come. The apparent chaos was actually precise choreography designed to make the mechanical enemies overconfident. Void swarm is taking the bait, reported Commander Vexhai from the tactical station. The Zephyrian officer's feathers were perfectly groomed, and his voice carried none of the dismissive tone he had used when speaking about human tactics just days earlier. They are increasing speed and moving into the asteroid belt in pursuit. Formation. Amy nodded, watching as the red dots on the display moved exactly along the paths her plan had predicted. Signal Phase 2. Activate the minefield on my mark. The next several minutes unfolded with mechanical precision. As the Void Swarm fleet moved deeper into the asteroid belt, the hidden mines began activating in sequence. Instead of exploding, they created invisible energy barriers that gradually channeled the mechanical ships into narrower and narrower corridors of space. High Mystic Lumara's voice came over the communication system from her ship positioned at the edge of the mine field. Psionic camouflage is holding. The enemy sensors cannot detect the energy barriers until they make direct contact. The Void Swarm's artificial intelligence began to recognize that something was wrong, but by then it was too late. The mechanical fleet was being funneled into a specific region of space with no room to maneuver. Their perfect formation became a liability as ships found themselves packed together in increasingly tight formations. Phase 3, Amy announced. War Chief Brondar, initiate solar cascade in 30 seconds. From his position near the star, the massive Kronos commander acknowledged the order. His ship's magnetic field generators began working in unison, creating a resonance effect in the star's own magnetic field. The process was incredibly dangerous. Too much power, and the star itself could become unstable. Too little, and the electromagnetic pulse would be insufficient to disrupt the Void Swarm's coordination systems. Amy watched the display as energy readings from the star began climbing toward critical levels. Chardon, I need probability calculations for optimal timing. The crystalline navigator's chiming voice provided updates as she processed multiple timeline convergences simultaneously. Probability matrix indicates optimal cascade release in 7 seconds, 6 mile 5. All ships prepare for electromagnetic pulse, Amy announced over the fleet communications network. Hardened systems only, emergency protocols in effect. The star erupted. A cascade of electromagnetic energy swept outward from the system's center, washing over the trapped Void Swarm fleet like an invisible tsunami. The mechanical ship's coordination systems failed instantly, leaving each vessel operating independently without the collective intelligence that made them so effective. But Amy knew this was only the beginning. The Void Swarm's individual ships were still powerful and dangerous. Worse, their artificial intelligence would begin adapting to the new situation within minutes. Phase 4, she commanded. All ships, execute pattern Delta. Hit them while they're confused, but don't get drawn into prolonged engagement. Coalition ships swept in from all directions, attacking the disoriented Void Swarm vessels with precisely coordinated strikes. But instead of trying to destroy the enemy fleet, they focused on disrupting repair efforts and preventing the mechanical ships from re-establishing communication with each other. Amy coordinated the attack from the Meridian Dawn's command center, her calm voice cutting through the chaos of battle communications. She issued orders to 17 different ship classes across 4 alien species, each executing maneuvers timed to microsecond precision. Zephyrian strike wings. Begin pattern. Delta 7 as soon as the EMP wave clears your position. Ethereal frigates. Maintain psionic disruption of enemy coordination attempts. Kronos battle cruisers. Target their communication arrays but avoid their main weapons. The battle unfolded exactly as Amy had predicted. The Void Swarm's mechanical intelligence struggled to adapt to the rapid succession of unrelated tactical approaches. Each time their systems began to counter one strategy, a completely different attack vector would open up. The organic unpredictability of coalition tactics became their greatest weapon, but Amy knew the most dangerous moment was still ahead. As the Void Swarm began to recover from the initial assault, their central command ship started broadcasting new coordination protocols to the scattered fleet. If they were allowed to re-establish unified control, they would adapt to every tactic the Coalition had used and become nearly impossible to defeat. All ships, this is Admiral Carter, Amy announced over the fleet-wide communications network. Execute Protocol Lazarus. General Blake, standing beside her command chair, understood what this meant. His voice was quiet but audible to everyone on the bridge. Admiral, that will expose us to direct attack from their heaviest weapons. Amy looked at him with an expression that was both determined and sad. The mission requires it, Marcus. She activated the ship-wide communication system, her voice reaching every crew member aboard the massive vessel. All hands, this is your Admiral. In 30 seconds, we will drop our shields and redirect main power to boost the solar cascade, beyond safe parameters. The Meridian Dawn will become the focal point for eliminating the Void Swarm command ship. Throughout the ship, crew members from 12 different species worked together with desperate efficiency. Amy's months of working alongside them as a simple engineer had built bonds of trust and respect that held firm even under the ultimate pressure. Tony Rodriguez, working frantically in the engine room, followed her orders without question, despite knowing the terrible risk they were taking. The plan worked. With the Meridian Dawn serving as a focusing lens for the enhanced solar cascade, a beam of concentrated electromagnetic energy struck the Void Swarm's command ship and destroyed its central processing core. Without their unified intelligence, the entire mechanical fleet shut down simultaneously, their ships drifting silent and powerless through space. But the victory came at a cost. The Meridian Dawn's hull was cracked in several places, her systems were failing, and life support was running on emergency power. As rescue ships from across the Coalition arrived to assist, Amy stood on the damaged bridge watching the wreckage of the mechanical fleet drift through space like a metallic graveyard. General, Blake approached her, his voice quiet and respectful. Permission to speak freely, Admiral? Always, Marcus. Why maintain the deception for so long? You could have taken command from the beginning and saved us months of ineffective planning. Amy turned from the viewport, her expression thoughtful. Because authority isn't about rank, Marcus. It's about earning the right to ask others to follow you into impossible situations. These beings needed to see that humans understand sacrifice, adaptation, and the patience to wait for the right moment to act. She looked around the damaged bridge, where alien crew members worked alongside humans to restore their ship's critical systems. Engineers from 6 different species shared tools and expertise, while medical personnel treated wounded regardless of which world they came from. They needed to learn that when a human asks for permission,